I think there are a lot of things that people believe, almost the world on the whole believes, that are not true, that we've been really lied to from day one, since we start going to school. The overarching paradigm that we're reared in and taught to believe is based on a false premise. And that's dangerous when you believe things that aren't true in many ways, in many cases. And to start with, one of the things that I think is ubiquitously believed amongst just about everyone these days is the theory of evolution. And just because I'm arguing against the theory of evolution doesn't mean necessarily that you would have to adopt creationism as an alternative perspective. But so keep that in mind. In fact, Richard Dawkins himself, when Ben Stein was interviewing him in the documentary Expelled, after being pressed and pressed and pressed, finally came to say, well, we don't really know how the life was seeded here in the first place. What was the first inception of life? Because according to science, we need to be able to observe these things. And he had to concede that it's not observable. And what we can observe scientifically is that life does not emerge from non-life. So this closet here, the wood that comprises it, well, actually the wood is life, but all right, inanimate matter. So plastic, that did not come from life. Or things that are not biological systems cannot emerge from, say, rock. So even with the primordial soup explanation, it doesn't quite get us there. And Dawkins had to concede at some point and say, well, I guess it could have emerged by some alien intelligence seeding life here, which would be the doctrine of panspermia, which I dismiss, but could be an alternative explanation if you're not comfortable with the idea of creationism. So the intent isn't even to promote creationism so much as to really scrutinize the idea of evolution rather than just believing it because that has been what has been beaten into your head since you were in first grade. Now, I said it was dangerous to believe things that aren't true. When you look at the theory of evolution and look at some of the historical atrocities that have occurred, look at Nazism. Nazism is an evolutionary, it's a Darwinian cause. It's based on the premise that there are some people who are less evolved, they are less than, and they should be exterminated. So this gives rise to all kinds of eugenicist theories, such that this person, or this kind of person, these people, are bad for the propagation of the human species because they're not as evolved. So we need to remove them, and that's how we're going to have a stronger cohesion in our gene pool, and the superior gene pool. And I think this is why there's a lot of word magic and skirting around the facts that people use. And one of those is just in the Bible of Darwinian theory itself, the origin of species. We call it the origin of species. What it's really called is On the Origin of Species, or the, what is it? Something to the effect of, it's a longer title, but you don't know it as the origin of species. It's On the Origin of Species, or the selective mutations for the betterment of the favored races. I botched that. It's not exactly that, but the final phrasing is essentially for the propagation of the favored races. Well, he's talking about human races there. So the favored races being, I would have to imagine white people, since Darwin was white and the people promoting all this were white. And I am not a proponent whatsoever of critical race theory or anything like that, so I'm not making this a big, like, the race issues that we see today are at least in part manufactured, as opposed to what they had been before, not manufactured at all. Really real and serious race issues. But the real race issues were, I think, back then, and those racism has its roots in evolutionary theory. A lot of the genocide that has happened throughout history comes from that, and I think will come from that in the future as well. We have cultural Marxism and Nietzsche and all these philosophies that are ultimately anti-human at their core. Those are very foundationally Darwinian. They couldn't exist if an alternative theory for how mankind really came about existed. So the premise is anti-human, but we know that scientifically the theory of evolution is accurate, because that's what we're told. There's anthropology books. There's any science book. All all the experts throughout history since Darwinian theory took root, curators of museums and things like that. They all point to it because it's just a scientific fact, isn't it? Well, no. I mean, even they would concede that it's called the theory of evolution for a reason. It's not a fact. For something to be scientific, it has to be observable. It cannot be theoretical. It has to be. It can start as a theory, but you have to be able to conduct experiments that yield data that are measurable. So not subjective data that are measurable, and then you have to be able to repeat those tests and continue to gather data. And so once you have amassed enough data to either endorse or dismiss a hypothesis, then you can say, well, that lends credence to a particular theory, and we can say that's scientific. So the core of the scientific method is observation. And I find it interesting that a lot of people that say that they're scientific minded, that they are just logically oriented people, oftentimes they'll say that with an air of superiority, like, well, I'm too logical to believe in things like whatever, or ghosts, or the supernatural, or the whatever, what have you. When really to dismiss a thing prior to investigation is the antithesis of science. So these people that say I'm too scientific, and basically what they're saying is I'm too smart to consider such things. That's the opposite of smart, to not consider a thing. So what we have with the theory of evolution is not a scientific theory, because it's never been observed. We can't observe genetic mutations occurring in nature that are successive enough to lend a benefit to the organism. What we see is microevolution. We see these adaptations taking place on a micro scale that lend to a species preserving itself for longer. I think the big thing people point to is those moths that camouflage themselves. But what we don't see is that genetic mutations are generally beneficial. By and large, the vast majority of the time you see a mutation in a thing, it's detrimental to the organism. It's not beneficial. So when we look at the fossil record, if we're looking at, so the whole premise behind the theory of evolution is that one organism develops these minor changes that over time become increasingly beneficial. So fins turn into feet, turn into tails, what have you. And what you'd expect in the fossil record, is what evolutionists point to as their strongest evidence, which is insane because it's the strongest evidence we have against the theory of evolution. You look at the fossil record, you don't see part fish, part mice. You don't see part this organism, part that completely different organism. You'd have all kinds of things that are like stubs that are part fins that are fossilized halfway between the transition between that and limbs. And what we do have is we have one complete organism jumping all the way over to another fully complete organism. We don't have a ton of intermediary fossils to demonstrate the successive adaptation of an organism. And what you would have, the vast majority of the fossil record would be that. It would be intermediate organisms. And we have almost none. The things they point to, in fact, have almost all been dismissed, I think. My case in point, I guess I'll just point to Archaeopteryx, which is what they had pointed to as an intermediary transitional form of a lizard in the process of evolution turning into a bird. And what we know now is that, well, at least what we should know now, some people know now, some people are probably still in denial, is that that's not the case. That's just another flying lizard. Like we had pterodactyls, we had all these other things. And Archaeopteryx is just one of those. It wasn't a transition between a lizard and a bird. We know that because we have bird fossils that predate Archaeopteryx. So Archaeopteryx cannot be that prototype for the kingdom of the lizards transitioning into the kingdom of birds, or phylum, or whatever it is. I think that another thing that we have to look at too is, let me see, I did some notes here so I don't forget anything. Punctuated equilibrium is often what they point to show that we have this situation where we can't observe, even they've acknowledged now, we can't observe evolution occurring. A 4-year-old can make these arguments like, okay, why don't we see any half monkey people now? Well, the evolutionists knew that they were in a bind with that and had to come up with something really quick to explain it away. And so they developed the idea of punctuated equilibrium, which is that evolution occurs in spurts. And way back when, we had this evolution flap where it was happening on a regularly, fairly quick basis. Whereas now we're in more of a slump and we just don't see it right now. Conveniently, we don't observe it now, but it did happen then. So punctuated equilibrium is, I mean, to me, it sounds like a bit of a cop-out. I mean, how convenient is that we just can't see it now? Another convenience with the theory of evolution is that there's an element of magic involved with when you look at the active ingredient, it is time. We don't understand how it works and we can't see it, but over the course of billions and zillions of years, this is what can happen. So to look at it in a manner, I think that's realistic. I heard it put this way. Say a worm becomes a man in a day and you'll be laughed out of any room. Say a worm becomes a man in a million years and you'll be given the Nobel Prize. It's just brilliant, genius. If you just implement that ingredient of time into any theory, you can explain anything. It's just, well, given enough time, and given the fact that space is broad enough and the universe is so vast, literally anything could occur. Therefore, here's our theory. So, the time aspect is also another one of those, it's one of those cop-outs. Furthermore, they don't really explain what random selection is, and that really is, along with time, random selection is that little magic thing that makes it happen. First of all, random selection especially the word selection, is a bit of an oxymoron. At random, especially paired with that, random selection. First of all, what really is that? What's doing the selecting? Because when you say selection, that implies an intelligence. You cannot have something that is impartial or inanimate doing something like making a selection, even if you're saying that it is random, which really defies all logic in the first place. So when we talk about random selection, really, that would be evidence of God or some kind of design. That's an argument more for design. So it's strange to me that that is so heavily leaned on in this theory. So getting to some of the good arguments against it, in my opinion, one of them is called irreducible complexity. And this was put forth by Dr. Michael Behe, if I'm saying that correctly. And the idea is that, and Darwin himself said that if an organism were to be discovered that is so simple that it couldn't have emerged by way of natural selection or by successive genetic adaptations, because all of its component pieces had to be simultaneously in operation in order for it to have existed in the first place, then my theory would fall apart. Well, back then they didn't have the single cell organism, or they didn't know about it. And since then, we have made that discovery. So that is the simplest organism we can point to, the simple cell organism, or the single cell organism. And just looking at the at the parts of that, it's super reductionist to say, but just to break it down to its, I guess, basic component parts. You've got like the cell wall, cytoplasm, you have the nucleus, we've got mitochondria in there and different organelles, a flagella or maybe cilia to help with propulsion. And those are basic components. So Michael Behe put it this way. He likened that unto a mousetrap. You've got the platform, you've got the spring, you've got the hammer that's attached to that, and you've got the catch that props it up. You also got the trigger mechanism. In order for that to be operational, you can't just start with the platform, catch a few mice with it, and then add a hammer with no spring, just a hammer laying there, catch a few more mice, then add a catch a few more mice. It doesn't work that way because the hammer is useless without the spring. They're both useless without the platform to attach it to. You can't arm it without the catch, and you have to have a trigger mechanism for it to be functional in the first place. So all those things have to be in simultaneous operation for it to work. The same is true of the single cell. You can't just start with we'll just have a random pool of cytoplasm, and there's no cell wall to contain it. There's no nucleus to provide organization for it. You can't just start with a flagella wiggling around with nothing to propel it. You can't just have a nucleus sitting there with no purpose, no cell wall around it to, or body or cytoplasm or organelles to propel it, to catch food, to eat with. It all has to be in operation simultaneously. This is something that we can point to that there is no way that it could form throughout the process of adaptations. It doesn't make sense. And even in its simplicity, it's far, 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 far too complex for something like that. Bear in mind, the scientific community does like to prop itself up as the bearers of all knowledge, and they think they've got it figured out pretty well, such to the extent that they had made an effort to replicate the creation of life. I don't know I think they did this in the 60s, might have been before then too, I don't know, but they knew what was in the atmosphere, the proportions of oxygen to carbon dioxide and nitrogen in the air, and the basic components of our Earth, and tried to create the primordial soup from which we are supposed to have emerged. and of course failed. Obviously, they did not create life. And even in modern scientific experiments where they say that, oh, we created a synthetic, what was the last thing that they said they created? Anyway, they didn't really. They took a pre-existing cell and modified it and said, oh, we created it. No, well, no. You didn't start from scratch. That does nothing to endorse the theory that you're trying to authenticate. You can't just alter something that's pre-existing and say that, oh yeah, we did it. So that doesn't stand to reason at all. Apart from that, if you just go to the basics of physics and this is what we can observe. You look at the laws of thermodynamics, the first and second in particular. That alone is enough to provide, to me, I think, damning evidence against the theory of evolution. The first law being that energy cannot be created or destroyed. It's always there. The second being the law of entropy, which is the gradual degradation of all matter. What we can observe is that all matter is slowly going away, it's decaying. It's not, we don't ever see the opposite. We don't see matter bolstering itself or becoming stronger. We don't see things being created from nothing. So the theory of evolution would have to defy, again, an unobservable theory. Evolution would have to defy an observable theory, entropy. Because in order for an organism to become increasingly stronger, that is the opposite of witnessing what we do witness in nature, and that's the gradual destruction of all things, for lack of better phrasing. So we have irreducible complexity. We have the laws of thermodynamics. Again, what we do observe, that mutations are harmful to organisms largely. And so when we have things that we can observe that directly fly in the face of this theory that we're all supposed to believe, and I'll digress here for a moment, we're supposed to believe it because it provides really one of the only alternatives to the idea that we have intrinsic value. Really, going back to the idea that this is a dangerous theory, the most dangerous thing about it is that it devalues what we are and who we are. It devalues human beings. It reduces us to, people love to say that we're just animals. And that's harmful, again, going back to the eugenics, going back to these horrible atrocities that have occurred throughout history. They're not really atrocities if you don't have any kind of a divine spark within you. If you are just an animal, really no different than, chopping a chicken's head off and throwing it in a pot to have some chicken stew at the end of the day. It's this devaluing of human beings that is really at the core of evil. You can look at almost any evil philosophy devalues human beings, and the philosophies that produce productive societies, healthy people, happy people, and just overall goodness imbue the human with inherent value. And so this is a philosophy that takes that away, and we can justify just about anything. It leads to all kinds of subsequent theories that I think are equally damaging. It goes back to ancient philosophical debates. We've got the old debate of substance dualism versus, I don't know, it's a form of monism, I guess. But anyway, fancy way of saying, is there a soul or isn't there a soul? And does consciousness derive from the brain itself, or is it a separate entity? Believe it or not, this actually can be studied scientifically and was studied scientifically. And we've got evidence for substance dualism, for the idea that the human is not just our bodies, and that we're more than that. Consciousness doesn't come from the brain. The brain is an organ used for us to express our consciousness. So my brain helps me gesture a lot. I guess I've been told I talk with my hands a lot. My brain helps me talk and decide to do things, but that's because it's connected to my central nervous system. It's kind of the control center for me to express my thoughts. But my thoughts carry on aside from brain function. We see that even in our dreams. You go to sleep, and even when you're not conscious, your brain doesn't stop. Your thoughts don't stop. That's why you have dreams. Anyway, I digress. If we've got such a scientific theory, and we know so much about it, yet we still can't call it a fact as much as we want to, then all this evidence has to be in error, which the fossil record is not evidence whatsoever. In fact, it's evidence for the opposite of the theory of evolution, an obscene lack of transitional forms. What are the other evidences we have? Well, kind of in alignment with the fossil record, we have that most crucial piece, the missing link. And I find it really interesting when you look at the missing links that have been proposed throughout history. They all fall short. Lucy, that was the big one. That's probably the most well-known. Lucy was an amalgamation of different animals put together, and why it was so groundbreaking at the time is because there was a patella that indicated bipedal locomotion, and that was associated with the skull cap. So we said that, okay, this is a hominid that's bipedal. Well, some of the pieces were found over in this region, buried at this strata, and then the skull cap and other pieces were found 2 miles away, buried like 20 feet deeper. So completely different organism, and they just put them together because they're in the same general area, I guess. Later on, notable evolutionists, I think it was Richard Leakey, said that, okay, this is not a thing. Lucy is not a missing link. It's an amalgamation of multiple creatures. So that can be dismissed, but is it dismissed? No, it's not. It's still promoted in evolutionary texts as something we can point to as evidence for the theory of evolution, which is clearly not if it's not even the same organism. We've got the others are Piltdown Man, Kennewick Man, the Nebraska Man. All of those have issues. And I confuse them and I forget which is which, but I believe it was the Piltdown Man might have been the one that they had thought, I think that was the outright hoax, where it was actually an ape, and they filed down the incisors to make it look more human. So that was a blatant forgery, and that was widely accepted and promoted, and I believe still is, and probably is the subject of these completely theoretical wax creations that they have in museums that are, again, not scientific. That's just an artist rendition. It's like, well, here's what I think it could look like. Don't put so much faith in science that you start believing that you can look at a bone, and from that bone, you can extract all of the genetic information to form the creature itself and know exactly how it looked and its behaviors and what it did and what it sounded like. You can't do that. So that was a blatant forgery. Nebraska Man, I think, is the one where they found a tooth, and from that single tooth, they constructed this whole missing link, monkey-looking person, and that's insane in the first place. But to make it even more insane, later they found out that it was a boar tooth. It wasn't even a hominin of any kind. So, you look at these forgeries and horrible mistakes, And you have to think, what is going on here? What if again, if we have this theory of evolution, there should be more transitional forms than there are whole separate creatures that are in the fossil record, and we can't even come up with one. And in order to come up with one, we have to literally invent it. So I'm a firm believer in where there's smoke, there's fire, and there's something a little sneaky going on in our scientific community, in the realms of anthropology. And it goes back to that idea that, well, if this theory doesn't fit into the current into our club, which is really what it is, into our little clique, then we're going to dismiss it and not even look at it. Anti-science, that's called scientism. That's the religion of science. It's that we've already decided what's true, and now we are only going to accept evidence that condones our theory, or that promotes it. Which, if you don't know it, that's a problem. Then I don't know. You should maybe live in a padded cell, or just don't involve yourself in society, because you can't contribute to it anyway. That's a problem. It's obviously a problem. So very strange. And if you don't think that bias exists, then I would point you to, there's a few resources you could look at. But all you have to do is look at, if you go down this bunny trail, it'll probably lead you to multiple others. Dr. Mark Armitage, who I believe was, what university? State of California. Anyway, anthropologist guy who's studying remains of a triceratops. And he found in a triceratops horn soft tissue. This is a groundbreaking, huge discovery. And the reason it is because it defies the current scientific paradigm that really entraps the minds of all the people that are supposed to be the biggest thinkers in our world, are scientists. Puts them in a box where, oh no, we know that this happened millions of years ago and this was this long ago. The fact that soft tissue was found in a triceratops horn really kind of challenges a lot of those presuppositions and dating methods and all kinds of things. And so one of the biggest discoveries ever, you'd think that this guy would be given whatever prize they give those people, and just receive all kinds of accolades. What did happen was he was terminated. And obviously, because he developed actual scientific data, but the problem is that it wasn't the right kind. It didn't promote what it was supposed to promote. And so, and he was even told by a colleague that, had we known you're a creationist, we wouldn't have hired you in the first place. You don't belong here. And it had nothing to do with creationism. It's like, I just objectively found soft tissue in a triceratops horn. Well, the university know that they screwed up. They knew they did. So they settled for quite a large sum of money. I forgot what it was. But they knew that they terminated him because he didn't say what he was supposed to say. And they were embarrassed. I mean, I guess I would be too if my whole career, and really the humanity's understanding of who we are and what we are and where we come from, hinges largely upon these timelines that have been invented for what happened when, and all leading back to evolutionary theory, that had been threatened. And we're in a position where, oh my God, we're going to have to rewrite all of the history books. We're going to have to take down all our ridiculous wax sculptures in the museums. We're going to have to say that we were wrong. Huge blow to pride. Huge blow to all of that scientific arrogance that believe me, is alive and well in the academic community. It's if I had to put you in any community to demonstrate the height of arrogance. Well, it'd probably be in circles of fame and fortune, like Hollywood celebrities. Second to that would be the academic community. Very arrogant. And in order for real objective thinking to take place, humility is required. You can't be arrogant. You can't say, this is true, therefore I will accept evidence only that bolsters the position that I already hold to, which is called confirmation bias, which is antithetical to what science is supposed to be. And yet, this is what we have. The bias is very real. Mark Armitage is one example of probably thousands. You can watch this isn't directly related to evolution, but if you don't think that's a thing, then watch Indoctrinate You, or Expelled, which I mentioned earlier. Watch those two documentaries, and that'll lay it out pretty clearly. So, there's a reason that we can't say that life comes from non-life, and that when you really think about it this way. Think about a rock spawning life somehow. There's nothing but a rock, and from that we got life. Your compulsion to reject that notion, I think, comes from a sense of you know that it's inherently ridiculous. You know that it's inherently ridiculous for a worm to become a man. And maybe you just haven't heard the arguments against it, because we live in a society that is fully indoctrinated, and there is essentially we live under an illusion. There are many cases in prehistory even, I'm sure, but let's just go back a couple of years where, say geocentric theory, we're dealing with Galileo, and well, is the Earth the center of the universe? There's another, even back like 100 years or 200 years, what was widely accepted as best medical practices we look at today and be like, wow, that's barbaric, that's insane, I can't believe those people actually believe that stuff. And yet, if you didn't believe that stuff, you'd be ostracized, you'd be rejected, because that was the main paradigm, that's the worldview, that's what you're supposed to think. Now we say that's ridiculous. So to get a clear perspective on it, try to jump forward 200-300 years and think, okay, you know that those people are going to look back on us and be like, can you believe people like 200 or 300 years ago actually believe this? And what is it? What is it that we believe that's ridiculous? Because I know in our current state, modern man, it seems, they always seem, I think in any given time, at least it makes sense to me to believe that, well, we're at the height of knowledge of mankind. We always compare ourselves to people of history where we just know more now. We've got a broader collection of information to go off of. So we're the smartest and we're the best, and we forget that we're stupid as hell. And we can lift up the scientific community as much as we want. The people that believed in phrenology, or the idea that I'll forget that, just bloodletting, or trying to think of medical things that were accepted, like lobotomies, just, well, take out pieces of the brain, that'll solve the problem. Those were our great scientists. Those were the great scientific minds. So when you're imbuing these people who are proclaimed as experts, you imbue them with a sense of expertise and authority on a matter, that's an error. And we shouldn't be doing that. We should take what they say with a grain of salt, and we can explore that, and we can look at that, and we can try to parse that out. But to blindly accept what these scientific and academic communities are trying to impress upon us is just the height of stupidity, when we know full well that it's the human condition to just simply be wrong all the time about nearly everything. To think that we're in a different place now because we're just so advanced is kind of lunacy. But if I have to explain that again, padded cell, that should be obvious. I think that's all I've got. I'll probably think of a lot of things and a lot of points to make that I probably should have included and didn't, but maybe next time, if there's a next time. I'm not an expert on this. I'm not an expert creationist. I'm not an expert on evolutionary theory. I've thought about it. I think a lot about a lot of things, and this is the conclusions that I've drawn, but by no means is this even scratching the surface of all of the arguments against it. This is like a preview of it. But when you are presented with ideas that are formative to your entire worldview, formative even to your faith or human ideology, where we come from, what we are and who we are, you're insane if you just accept what somebody tells you without really giving it a thought. Well, it's in the textbook, so I guess that's the way it is. No, anyone can write a textbook. To be honest, all you have to do is have a grasp on terminology and regurgitate the things that previous textbooks have said. They all play off one another, and that's how we end up in these messes, because nobody has an original thought. So question things, I guess, to sum it up. That's all I got.